Ike. I'm going to show everybody how to make some tools out of some everyday materials that you can find around your house or could easily be picked up for a relatively low price. This is a great little workshop or video for teachers. I'm a high school teacher myself. Some of the things I've used and I've made, and this is part of my daily classroom, is I make needle tools out of bamboo and wire coat hangers or poultry needles. I make trimming tools. I'm going to show you guys how to make trimming tools out of bobby pins, as well as using bamboo and maybe ballpoint pen handles. I'm going to show you guys how to make a nice little sgraffito tool, very similar to the trimming tool, but to get nice little details on stuff. One of my favorite tools I make is a little scratcher tool, great for my students. Show you guys how to make that one. I'm also going to show everybody how to make a very easy and cheap wire tool that you can very easily make for classroom set of 30 or 40 or 20 or 6 or however many people you have in your classes. After I make the tools, I'm going to show you guys how I use those tools. I'm going to make a mug. I'm going to make a bowl. I'm going to throw it. I'm going to trim it. And that's kind of what I'm going to show you. So my name is Ryan Reich, and I teach high school in Orange County, California. I've been teaching high school for 15 years. I teach ceramics and advanced ceramics and AP studio art. I have about 33 students per class. It's the best job in the world. I have found that being kind of resourceful and kind of showing students how we're making our tools can connect a lot to the historical aspects of ceramics and pottery. When I teach my ceramics classes, we start at the very beginning, at the very beginning of the time to a certain degree, or, very small little figurines and sculptures of animals from 20, 30,000 years ago. And as we start to progress through the semester, I show them different cultures, and I try to explain to them how these cultures didn't have a store they could go to buy their tools and buy their clay like we do nowadays. So they used the tools and they used the materials that were readily available to them, whether it was bones or shells or sticks or anything they could find that they had to make or put together or, MacGyver it or figure it out and make do with what you have. So I kind of take that same approach with my students nowadays, and I like to kind of push them to kind of think outside of the box and be creative. And one of the ways we start is by making these tools. In addition to being a high school teacher, I'm also a ceramic artist, and I make mostly pottery, and a lot of my pottery involves very specific tools that I've created for my own work. I'm not going to get too into my very specific tools that I use for my own work now, but I may do that at a future workshop or a ceramics congress video. But this one, I'm just going to kind of show everybody the basics. It's great for high school teachers, great for educators, great for hobbyists or artists that are just kind of interested in thinking outside of the box and kind of creating their own tools that they made and they're using to make their artwork. So make the thing to make the thing to make the thing. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this little workshop I've put together, and thank you very much for watching. Okay, so for the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to get a handle, something to hold on to make the tool. So the main material that I've used in my experience doing this is bamboo. The bamboo I get from Home Depot in the garden section. It's usually used for gardening for tomato plants. Comes in long lengths. This is like about 5 or 6 foot lengths. It's about 6 foot lengths, taller than me, so 6 foot lengths of bamboo. It has a variety of thicknesses. It's a grass, so obviously it's thicker at the bottom, then it's thinner and it goes to the top. So when I'm looking for bamboo, when I go shopping, I usually try to find the ones that are thicker, and I usually try to find the bag that has as many thick ones as I can. I find it that if it's thicker, if it's too thick, it's never too thick. So it's thicker it is. I can get the handles for the trimming tools and the needle tools. On the thin ends, I tend to use those more for the the wire tools. But you can see, like, that's the thin end, and then as it goes down, it goes a little thicker, 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 all the way to there. So I tend to like to use this end right here for the handles for the trimming tool and the needle tool. So that's what I'm going to do first. So the best way to do this would be to use a bandsaw if you have access to a bandsaw. That way you can kind of cut a bunch of them really quick. That's what I tend to do. If I'm just doing one or two, though, I'll just do it with a hacksaw. I'm doing it with a hacksaw. I usually don't use a clamp. The reason is and also when I'm cutting it, I'm paying attention to the where the little ends are, because these little ends right here are like solid, so it's harder to push the tool through. So I tend to try to keep these towards the middle, or something like that. So here we're gonna grab this piece, cut a piece, and then here's what I do. Now, if you cut it, using a chop saw doesn't work very well for this. A chop saw tends to make the whole thing kind of fray and kind of like splintery. So, and a bandsaw tends to not do that, because the bandsaw, it's kind of going in a continuous motion. So, the way I've found that works best to cut the bamboo is to kind of, find where you're going to cut it. I tend to make them about 6 inches or so for a handle for a trimming tool or a needle tool. And I start by just kind of cutting it like I normally would. And then what I start to do, what I found works really well, is that as I'm cutting it, I'm kind of like slowly turning it. So I'm kind of cutting through the outside layer before I get to the middle. If you cut through, like straight through, it will kind of splinter and it's kind of a pain in the butt. And then it's more work, you kind of have to maybe sand it or trim it. So cut this. Now I'm getting to the middle, and sometimes when you get to the middle, and we got a pretty clean cut, didn't splinter. Usually I take a little bit of sandpaper and just kind of clean them up a little. I'm not get too crazy, but just so it's not like splintery, so it comes apart. Alright, now, if you don't have access to a home improvement store or a gardening store that has bamboo that you can buy in this form, or if you don't have bamboo plant at your house, the best alternative that I found is a ballpoint pen. And actually, when I first learned how to do this, I learned how to do it by using a ballpoint pen, and I kind of figured out the bamboo would be a little more efficient way to do it. So any kind of ballpoint pen would work that you can easily take apart. Come in different shapes and sizes. These are two that I just kind of grabbed out of the junk drawer. So first thing you really need to do is just pull that thing off. It's up to you whether you want to leave that little cap in there. Some of them don't have the little end to pull. You can only pull out one end, so these would be perfectly good handles as well. You can use bamboo. You can see they're very similar in the diameter. It's very similar in the length. You can cut them to whatever length you want. I tend to cut them a little bit shorter for the wire tool. Sometimes I've found it comes in this green color. Same manufacturer or same bamboo, same section in the gardening section for the tomato plants. And sometimes it comes green to match and blend in more with your landscape of your plants. And sometimes it comes in the natural color. So either one works. But this is the kind of the materials we're going to use to make the handles for some of our tools today. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to have to make the business end of the tools. So, I found that some of the best tools to use, or the best things that I found to use that are easily accessible and cheap, are bobby pins. So these bobby pins come in different thicknesses. There are some of them are a little bit rounder, some of them are a little bit smaller. You can see here, I think I got these at Walmart or Target. And it's kind of weird when you're going through different sections of stores as an artist, not as a consumer of hair products, but a consumer of tools to make materials to make tools. You kind of tend to look at these things in different ways. So you can see here how a couple different bobby pins have different shapes and different sizes. And you can imagine how you can bend these into different shapes, which I'll show you in a minute. The best one that I found, the one that I recommend if you're kind of doing for your everyday trimming tool that you're going to use to trim most of your pots, it's these Conair roller pins. So these roller pins are a little bit thicker than the regular bobby pins. You can see this says curved bobby pins and this says roller pins. So I found that the roller pins actually work a little bit better, especially these Conair ones. I know I bought a bunch of them on Amazon, relatively cheap. I think it was $1 or $2 for an 18 pack. So I was able to go on Amazon and find these, and I bought a few packages just to have them on hand. So you can see here that the Conair roller pins are a little bit thicker. If you kind of turn them this way, I can show you guys that it's a little bit thicker and a little bit, meatier. So that's going to last a little bit longer for trimming, and you're not going to have to replace it as often. These small ones are really good for making like a sgraffito tool, like a small little carving tool. Oftentimes when I use these, I tend to go to a bench grinder and sharpen them. So the blade as it is when it comes off the factory is kind of sharp enough to cut, but it definitely will work better if you sharpen it. I use a bench grinder. You could use a Dremel. I don't have a bench grinder at my house, so sometimes at my house I've used just like a file. I just kind of use like a metal file just to kind of clean it up a little and give it a little more of an edge. But I'm going to bend a couple things and kind of show you guys the process on how I bend these bobby pins. So if you notice the bobby pin, how it kind of has one long flat side and then it has one curvy side. So I definitely pay attention to kind of the where the bends are, and that kind of gives me like a starting point. So first thing I do is I kind of open this up and kind of make it somewhat like a right angle, or maybe about like a little less than a right angle. I don't know, maybe that's about a 60-degree angle. 45, I don't know. But I kind of open it up like this. So what I'm looking at is I'm thinking that this long straight edge right here, this is going to be the main trimming tool part. This is going to be the edge that's going to do most of the work. So this is the part where I'm going to kind of make sure I kind of dictate how wide do I want my tool to be. Do I want to make a small little, half-inch, 3/4 of an inch trimming tool that can get into small spots? Do I want to make it, maybe about an inch or so, kind of a little bit more, efficient to do a little more work? I usually have a couple of these, but I tend to use a couple pairs of pliers. I usually get a couple pairs of needle nose pliers, and I kind of use these as like my little pretend hands. So usually I take this first right angle and I make this one of the corners, and then what I'm going to do is this end right here is going to get stuck into the bamboo. So I'm going to kind of, right where that little bend is, see that little bend? Where that bend is, I'm going to kind of push that out. And kind of get a little, a little shape. Something like that. And then I'm going to figure out how wide do I want to make this tool. So I'm going to make it like an everyday tool. This is the kind of tools I would make for my students. They would use on a regular basis. You can do one or two pairs of pliers, but definitely use at least one. So I'm just going to grip it really tight in my right hand. I'm right-handed. I'm going to just take my left hand. I'm just going to push this over. And kind of make it into almost like a little triangle shape. Something like that. Make sure I have enough space right here and kind of bent at a similar angle to kind of go into the thing like that. So that's one kind of a flat tool. Another kind of tool or another shape that people tend to want to have is a curved tool. So the curved tool is definitely a little trickier. Um, if you've never done this before, you might have to go through 5 or 6 bobby pins to kind of get the hang of bending them to the right shapes. If I'm making these for my students, which I tend to do once a year or so, when I do that, I tend to make I don't know 10 or 20 of them at a time. So I'll just sit down and bend like 10 or 20 pieces, and then I'll just kind of put them all together. So to do the curvy one, like a nice round shape, this one's definitely a little bit trickier. So I would start off by making the regular kind of flat one. So this one, I'm going to definitely need 2 pairs of pliers. So I'm going to grab the curvy end. I'm going to grab the curvy end with a pair of pliers. I'm going to use this big fat area right here to really get a good grip on it. I'm going to hold the bend. I'm going to hold it really close to where the bend is. Now I'm going to take my other pair of pliers and I'm going to kind of, okay, so I kind of have it gripped like this, right? Now I'm going to kind of bend this hand down this way and this hand down this way. So just making that big curve. Now this bobby pin is fighting me. It's definitely not completely working with me in the sense that it wants to spring back. So I just need to kind of be strong. My hands are kind of in a weird position. Once I kind of get it started, I might kind of grip it from the other direction. Now you can see I kind of have this little shepherd's hook looking kind of a thing. I'm going to take this little squiggly end right here and I'm going to bend it the opposite way. So it looks kind of more like this. Now I'm just going to grip it on the end. Grab this one on the end. I'm just going to kind of bend them. So a shape kind of like this. This is going to go bent. We're going to put these 2 ends together. This thing is very springy, so it wants to fight back. Probably going to need a pair of pliers to get it in there. But you want it to be springy because that's going to give it tension while it's in here, and it's going to keep that nice and tight. It's going to need a little bending once I get it in there, but you can kind of see how there's another kind of a decent sized tool. It's hard to make really, really big loops, but you can get a decent, 1/2 inch. I have some bigger ones, but that's kind of the thing. If you want to make like a little small sgraffito tool to do some kind of carving, these ones are harder to sharpen when we're just trying to sharpen this on a bench grinder. So I usually, if I sharpen these, I end up doing these little sgraffito tools by hand. So that's kind of the getting the bobby pins ready for putting them together. So now I'm going to grab a little chunk of clay because we're actually going to need a little chunk of clay right now. I'm just going to get it ready. I'm just going to roll out a little coil, put it to the side. We're going to use this piece of clay to hold the tools upright while the glue dries. That way the glue, if the glue goes down, that's fine. You can always refill it with more glue later. Let's make a little coil like that. Okay, so now when it comes to the glue that you want to use, in my experience, I've usually used 2-part epoxy, like 5-minute epoxy, and I also used Gorilla Glue. So either one of those will work. So the first thing I do is I kind of take if I'm using the bamboo one, it has this like fiber inside. So usually before I start gluing it, I kind of get it in there and I kind of set it and I kind of move around those fibers a little bit so it's not as so there's room for my stuff the material to get in there. And we're just going to kind of start to bend it now that I kind of have it thin. To me, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty round. It's not perfect. It's never perfect. But I know when I'm trimming, that tool will do some good work. Shouldn't be too big of a deal to sharpen this on a bench grinder. I'm going to use Gorilla Glue. I have this clear Gorilla Glue that seems to work pretty good. The yellow Gorilla Glue works also. Or the kind of ambery stuff, that stuff expands a lot. So I have some where the little mountain shows up of the little expanded glue. This one doesn't seem to expand quite as much. So it's kind of nice that it doesn't expand as much. Expansion's good, but then it looks kind of funky. So to get the glue on there, what I do is I usually get a piece of paper or a paper towel or something, and I just squirt a little bit of glue onto the paper. When I'm using the 5-minute 2-part epoxy, I'm mixing them together, so I have to have it on a thing. So this is just kind of how I've always done it. So I just this is how I get the glue on there. So I'm just gonna kind of push the glue, just kind of smear it around, get some on there, and just kind of get it kind of on there. Kind of get it pretty thick, as thick as I can, and then when I put it in, I kind of like move it around a lot. Sometimes I'll grab like an extra bobby pin, because, you know, I got plenty. And I'll have like a sacrificial bobby pin that I'll sometimes use to kind of try to help get a little more in there. Once it dries, you can peel off the extra glue on the handle. So I'm trying to be as neat as I can, but at the same time, it ain't going to be perfect. Make sure you have something down. If you're trying to squirt it right in, that's fine, but it's going to drip, so be aware that you don't want to mess up your workspace. And so, you can see here how I got the kind of glue, got it all glued in. Now I'm just going to stick it on my little coil of clay, kind of like making a little cone pack. Just make sure it's in there good. We'll do the same thing with the square rectangle one. This time I'll do it with on the ballpoint pen handle. When you're doing it with a ballpoint pen handle, it's a lot looser. So you need to kind of fill the void a little bit. It's hard to just kind of leave it like this and just rely on glue. So if you don't have the big bamboo stakes, possibly you might have bamboo skewers. Or if you don't have bamboo skewers, toothpicks work really good. Get creative, get creative. I don't know. Figure it out. You need something to fill in the space that's going to kind of be okay getting in water. So bamboo and water doesn't tend to get too gross. Kind of has some, I don't know. I ain't a botanist. I'm a ceramic artist that makes stuff. Ooh. Sorry, edit that out. Start that with color. So anyways, I tend to use these bamboo skewers, and the bamboo seems to hold up really good in the water. Don't exactly know why, but I'm just going to cut these bamboo pieces into some smaller sections. Oops. Shorter than the pen for sure. And we're going to kind of use these to kind of help fill a little bit of the space in there. Toothpicks also work really well. But just kind of giving a little more material in there for this thing to glue onto. So I'm going to do the same thing, kind of glue it on. You can squirt it right over. Then I end up still coming back and getting a little bit of glue on it this way. I wouldn't recommend using hot glue, but you could. Hot glue might tend to, do weird stuff and kind of. It's not as permanent, but you could definitely use hot glue. And
You might have to glue it back together. The hot glue definitely could fill in the space. Could try that. I think a lot of this is there's not really like any hard set rules of like specifically how to do these things. A lot of it is just figuring it out with the materials you have, just like our ancient ancestors did, and having the problem that you've created and coming up with a solution. So it doesn't have to be, if you don't have it, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't figure out something else that'll work. So with the pens, they tend to have a lot more empty space. So if you want to squirt a little bit of glue in there, the pens, that's good. With the bamboo ones, probably not as necessary. And we'll do one more little one. Sometimes with these little ones, when you're putting the little ones together, these two little ends are going to go in at the same spot. And sometimes they don't want to go in because it doesn't fit, because they're just too tight, because there's just too much material right there to fit in this small space. So if you're doing a small sgraffito tool like this, you might need to, depending on how thick your bamboo is, but you might need to take a pair of your needle nose pliers or a pair of linesman pliers, or no, just the cutter ones. Oh, sorry. I'm kind of a tool guy. I'm not that much of a tool guy, but I'm kind of a tool guy. But anyways, if you kind of cut the ends off, then it tends to fit in there a lot better. So, same drill. Just going to glue this one. And usually I like to have about maybe half an inch or so sticking out. Nice little line work. Again, when these are all dry, I would want to sharpen them somehow. I've never tried sharpening them before. I thought about maybe I could try sharpening them when they're like flat, but it seems to be a lot easier for me to sharpen them when they have the handle on there to grab onto, because this is a relatively small piece of material and it's hard to sometimes grip it. So a lot of times when you're doing this, you're kind of playing with the drip. So you can kind of get that drip and try to manipulate it. If you've ever done glass blowing, you just kind of got to play with gravity and spin the thing and get it. So it's kind of a nice little round shape that looks halfway decent. Something like that. And boom. So, there's 3 trimming tools. And now we'll do the needle tool. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is make a needle tool and a little cleanup tool that I also have used. So I have out kind of the tools and materials I'm going to use for this tool. First thing we're going to do is the needle tool. So the needle tool, originally I started making needle tools, I was using wire coat hangers. And these totally work. There are different thicknesses and gauges. A lot of times these white ones, they have like a plastic coating over them. They're relatively thin, and it's not the best material to use, but it's one of the things that's definitely readily available. So most everybody in their closet probably has at least one wire coat hanger that you could possibly sacrifice. But what I usually do is I just cut the wire coat hanger pieces into like maybe 4 or 5 inch pieces. I don't usually measure, I just kind of eyeball it. And I've kind of learned it's better to make it bigger than shorter. It's better to have more of the piece glued into the handle as opposed to having less in the handle. So I would definitely over compensate and make it longer for that. So pretty straightforward to do the put it together. What I'll end up doing is after it's dried, the next day usually I would sharpen it on a bench grinder, and really it's just as simple as taking this wire coat hanger, glue more than half of it into the handle. I think that's kind of the key. and just kind of, before you kind of put it in, glue it, just kind of get it set. Sometimes the fiber kind of works in your favor in this instance, in this example, because the fibers kind of in the inside of the bamboo create like a little stopper so it doesn't fall all the way through. So a lot of times with the needle tool, I'll end up kind of pushing it in until how I want it, and then I'll just kind of stop. That's about for me an okay length. And I'll glue it together the same way that I glued the handle into the um, trimming tool. Just gobble a little on the paper towel, a piece of cardboard, and just like kind of getting honey on one of those wands. Just kind of get it on there and kind of let it move around a little, let it kind of coat it. And then kind of just slide it in. And when you put it in, kind of twist it around to make sure that try to get as much glue, as much of the needle covered with glue, and as much glue on the inside of the bamboo as possible. Now, if it's really loose, like if you're gluing this into a ballpoint pen handle, you're probably going to need a few bamboo skewers to kind of fill in the empty space so that needle tool doesn't move around too much. This might be a good idea you could actually use hot glue to kind of set like a little, foundation for it, just to kind of fill the void and then glue it in, or this might be a good idea to use the expanding glue, the expanding Gorilla Glue, if you know that you're going to use one of lots of these handles. That's definitely an option. So the other tool that I'm going to make is something that I kind of came up with, is kind of found out and realized through kind of doing some other things that the tines of these combs actually make for a pretty good cleanup tool. So I went to Target the other day and I bought like a big 12 pack of just random combs. And really, in retrospect, I wish I didn't do that, because I probably wasted a whole $1, because I got a bunch of combs that I'm not going to use, and I only have 2 or 3 that I'm actually going to really like. So you can see there's like different thicknesses, and you can imagine using this as a tool to get in here. It's a little bit flexible. There is a little bit of like, I don't know, when it was manufactured, I don't know how it was made, but I'm guessing maybe it was cast into a mold, and there's a little bit of like, stuff on there. I'm sure if you went to the 99-cent store or the Dollar Tree or whatever dollar store you have around you, you could probably find combs pretty cheap. Or you might even have one in your house that you can kind of mess with. So I'm going to grab my things and I'm going to cut a couple pieces off. I grab a handle, and I need to make sure that I grab a handle that has a kind of a little bit of a wider hole, and you can see pretty easily I can kind of just glue that in. So same way, gotta take this little piece, kind of get the glue all around it, let it kind of move around a little, aim for the hole. When it dries, the glue is kind of, you can kind of peel it off the sides if you want to, or just leave it. I have a nice little cleanup tool, which is, for me it's useful to get into handles and kind of cleaning up the seam between handles and cups and mugs. But another nice little tool for the toolbox. And so the other needle tool, the needle tool that I found that works even better than the wire coat hanger, is actually what's called Poultry lacing kit. So get yourself a Poultry lacing kit, and it comes with these 12 pins. I bought these on Amazon. They were pretty cheap. But these Poultry lacing kit comes with these nice needles. They're stiffer and stronger than the wire coat hanger. You could also look for nails. I'm sure there's all kind of things. But if you're like me and you really want to make some nice tools that are actually going to last, I found that these poultry lacing kit needles are better than the wired coat hangers. Wired coat hangers absolutely work, and everybody kind of has those. But if you don't, or if you want to spend a little money, or maybe you have these sitting around the house, or remember I went to the supermarket and they had them on the clearance rack after Thanksgiving. So it's a nice kind of sharpened already needle. You can do the same thing. Take your handle, kind of set it up. A little dab of glue. For the longest time I used epoxy. I used a 5-minute epoxy, and that worked really, really well. But it's definitely nice to have the Gorilla Glue that you can just squirt it out and not have to mix. And there's something about the smell of the epoxy that was a little more distinct. It was, I don't know. I find I always tell my students that the smell of 5-minute epoxy kind of smells like farts. Sorry if that's offensive. Hi, I'm Ryan Reich. Anyways, see, I got my little needle tool, got it glued up, got a nice little bead right there, nice little kind of round dome. Kind of tells me that it's probably full of glue. Some of it might move down a little, but in any case, that's the other kind of a needle tool. You could probably find the nails that work. I've tried nails. I never found anything that worked really well. I found that the wire coat hangers could work really good, and the poultry needles also work really well. Poultry lacing needles also work really well. So another tool that I have kind of made a lot of in my life, my students use them a lot, is what I call a scratcher tool. So in my world, we call it wetting and scratching. Some people call it slipping and scoring. We all have our processes on how we attach pieces of clay, but definitely it involves some kind of roughening up the surface with some kind of a sharp tool, and then adding some kind of liquid clay or maybe just water, and maybe repeating that process. Everyone does a little bit different, and the way I do it is scratch it, just add water or whatever I have that's close by. Water, scratch, water. I build it up a few times and make like kind of a nice thick uh, slip that I will create right on the clay. And there's different ways to make that slip. So what I've found that works really well, for the longest time I just used toothpicks. I would just go to a dollar store, buy a big box of 1,000 or 500 toothpicks, take 3 or 4 toothpicks, wrap them together with a piece of tape, and those worked great. Then I kind of realized that maybe something a little more sturdy and a little bit bigger was better because we would always lose the little scratchers from the toothpicks. So I started kind of graduated up to bamboo skewers. When you get the bamboo skewer, it's just kind of an impractical size for a tool. So definitely want to cut it down. Now, if you want to save the extra piece, you can save the extra pieces and use those for the fillers of your other tools if you need to. You could take a grinder or something and sharpen them, but bamboo cut's pretty easy. Got a nice little 3 things. You could do 3 or 4 or 5, however you wanted to do it, but this will make a nice little tool to scratch the clay when I'm attaching things together. The way you put it together is up to you, whatever you have available. I've used masking tape many, many times. A lot of times I'll use Gorilla tape or duct tape or something like that. It's a little more waterproof. Electrical tape would work. Don't need a whole lot. A couple inches. Make sure you line up the needle side, not the end side. Make sure you get the needle side all kind of straight. Pretty straightforward, and just tape it together. And then you have a nice scratcher tool. That's pretty easy. You could take I've taken the poultry lacing kit needles, and you could do something very similar. I found when I did it with this, I kind of had to take one, kind of bend them in different directions, and then keep one kind of straight in the middle. So it was kind of more of a fork, kind of a three prong kind of a thing like that, as opposed to having them all parallel. I don't know if that matters, but it was a little bit harder to get because really putting them together doesn't really make for a very. I don't. For me, that's not. I like them spaced out a little more. Another thing that I found, it's in Southern California. We have a store called Daiso. It's like it's like a Japanese. I want to say it's like a Japanese Target, or maybe more like a Japanese like Big Lots, or not a dollar store, but it's kind of more. It's a Japanese store, and there I found these really nice. They're called Teppo skewers. You can see there, Teppo skewers. They're just kind of bamboo skewers, but they're kind of square, and they kind of have. They're already, to me, they're already at a pretty nice length. Because I've noticed when I have these, and if they're too small, I tend to lose them. So sometimes for me, having it kind of the size of a pen, I can easily stick them in a cup or a jar, and all my tools are about similar height, so I don't have the little tools get lost in the bottom. So same thing with this. You can just kind of line them up. If you want, you can cut them down. The bamboo cuts pretty easy. But a little piece of tape, masking tape, but line them up, tape it up. You could probably glue it and tape it if you wanted to, and that's fine. I usually just tape it, and that's usually been good enough. And I've had tools that have lasted for a long time with just masking tape holding it together, but whatever works. But pretty easy to make some halfway decent scratcher tools, especially if you're coming from the teacher's perspective, where you maybe need to have 20, 30, 40 students in a class to go buy, expensive tools. Um, so we're just making tools out of whatever is easily accessible and readily available, whether it's toothpicks or bamboo skewers or Peppo skewers, whatever you got, that's what you can make your tools out of. And teachers, this is kind of, I found this to be a really awesome tool and very, very cheap. If anything, go buy a box of toothpicks for $1 at the dollar store or 99-cent store, and you're set for a while. And the next one we're going to do is we're going to do some ribs. Now, the ribs I'm making are nothing new, nothing special, but making it out of a gift card or a credit card or kind of one of these plastic pieces like this. So they come in normally pretty much the same shape, but there's definitely different qualities of plastic. I find that gift cards, just most generic gift cards, tend to work really well. I have a Starbucks gift card here. Um, I've gotten some Target gift cards that are really, really flimsy, and those don't work very well. They don't hold up. I think I've gotten some Target or Home Depot store credits, and those don't hold up very well. But a regular gift card will work. I have my school ID from a couple years ago. Um, some expired debit cards that I had. Um, so I'm not really worried. The numbers don't work. You could try to put it in. I ain't tripping. So, whatever you have available, if you have an old gift card, an old ID card, something like that. As a teacher, I've gone online and I bought like a big brick of like 100 blank ID cards, like white PVC blank cards. Relatively inexpensive, 100 of them, and then I was able to make like a bunch of tools, and I still have a lot of them that I'll have on hand whenever I need to make tools. So what we're going to do, we're going to get a gift card or whatever card we're going to use, and then we need to draw a shape on it. So I've most of my ceramics life, I've been using Kemper tools. They were kind of the basic toolkit we had when I first started in high school. And in college, when students got their beginning toolkit, it was usually the same kind of basic Kemper tools. So this kind of wooden rib shape is a shape that I've been very kind of used to and familiar with, and it's awesome because it neatly fits right onto a gift card. I know Cheryl Mud Tools makes a nice little shape that's pretty close to fit in there. But even if it doesn't fit, you can kind of move around a little and just kind of trace part of the shape and then flip it over and just kind of play with different shapes. You can play with different curves, you know. You can play with different curves of different objects that you have around, like this roll of tape. And you can imagine you can cut a nice clean semicircle right here and make a nice rib out of that. So there's a variety of ways to do that. All right, so what we want to do now is we want to trace the shape. I just use a Sharpie, ballpoint pen, or a felt tip pen of some kind. I'm not worried if I get a little of the pen on my wooden rib because I don't really care. You can see I got the shape, pretty straightforward. Another way to do it is to take like one of the mud tools, and you can just use like part of the shapes. This doesn't all fit on here, but we can kind of make a tool that's got similar characteristics as far as the curve goes, at least for part of it. So make a tool like that. I could even take the other end right here and kind of trace the two sides and then just kind of figure it out in the middle. And you get a nice curve like that. Let's do that one. What you can also do is you can take your, if you have a mud tool or a different shaped rib that you really like, even if it's too big, it doesn't quite fit onto the gift card or credit card, whatever we're using. You can see how it's a little bit too big. So the other thing you can do is you can take a gift card and a different shaped tool that's bigger. You can see here how this is a little bit bigger. I can still trace it. I'm just going to line up one end. I'm not worried about getting a Sharpie on my mud tool because once I start using it, it usually comes off. It doesn't really bother me. You could also just make one and have it as like your template, and then you can keep that template and trace it 100 times. And you can see I have a shape right there. There's a weird little bump right there, so I would just kind of use my pen, and when I start cutting it, my scissors will kind of clean it up a little. So I'm gonna get a pair of scissors, kind of more on the little heavy duty side. But whatever you have is what you have. And just like we learned when we were in elementary school, we try to do a long cut, and I'm really moving the card more than I am the scissors. So I'm just trying to slowly cut as carefully and cleanly as I can. Now it's hard to make a perfectly clean cut. I'm sure some people can do it better than I can. But you got a relatively okay cut. Another one. So I have my kind of rough cutout rib shapes that I made. Now what I want to do is I want to kind of make this edge really, really nice. So with a piece of sandpaper, this is some 120. I like to kind of put it flat on the table, kind of start it, just to kind of get the curve a little straighter. I find it's easier when I first start to kind of sand it on the table so it's flat. That way I can get that curve a little smoother, I guess. And once I kind of got it, or the curve looks pretty good, the profile, it's not bumpy. I'm imagining this is going to be on the inside of a bowl. Once it looks pretty good, now I'm going to kind of pick up the sandpaper and really try to kind of hit the edges a little more. Kind of round it off. This is 120. I'd probably sand it with 120, and then I would find maybe a 320 or a 220. Maybe use a couple different grits. If I have some 600 sandpaper, I might even, or 400, I might even go to that. So you can see I got a nice, pretty decent rib, pretty decent shape, nice and flexible. Didn't cost me anything other than maybe probably less than 5 minutes of my life. So that's a nice rib to use. If you have access to a wood shop, you can make awesome ribs. But if you don't have access to a wood shop, then that's kind of why we're here. So the next thing I'm going to show you guys is a wire tool. Wire tools are probably one of those things that I imagine a lot of people have had to make up a wire tool, you know, because they don't have anything else. I've found that monofilament fishing line works really, really well. I'm sure a lot of people use it. I always try to go as thick as I can and, you know, heavy duty. So this is some 80-pound test, Sea Striker monofilament, 50 feet. So 50 feet will get me, you know, quite a few wire tools out of this. The way I do this, I usually just cut myself a piece longer than I would ever want a wire tool to be. And I have a way that I tie it. Now, I'm not a fisherman, so if you're a fisher and I'm tying this knot, if you're a fisherman and I'm tying this knot and I don't know the name of it, I apologize. But this is how I do it. The first thing I'm doing is I'm getting the, okay. First thing I'm doing is I'm kind of running the wire or the monofilament kind of parallel to the handle. Now about halfway, I'm going to kind of grab it with my finger. Now I'm going to take this end here, I'm going to start to wrap it. And I'm going to wrap it really tight. And I'm going to make sure as I'm wrapping it around that little tail, that little parallel piece. I want to go around 2, 3, 4 times, nice and tight. Now I'm going to take my little end right here, kind of tie this through. You got to use my third hand. So that's what I got. Kind of tie that nice and tight. Now the way I tie them real tight is I get my pliers. I get one pair here on the little end, and I got my other end with my hand, and I just pull that sucker tight as I can. Especially with this 80-pound test, you can pull it pretty good. Then I just tie another basic knot, hold it in. And again, I'm going to tie this thing pretty freaking tight. In my experience, if you get this nice and tight, this doesn't move around too much. That stays in there pretty good. And it won't come untied because we kind of loop that piece underneath. So that's kind of the way tie it. Then I'll take a pair of pliers, cutters, or scissors. I usually leave about maybe a centimeter or so, maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, something like that. I don't want to cut it too tight, otherwise it'll come undone. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail there to, you know, make sure it doesn't get messed up. Then I'm going to kind of figure out about how wide I want my wire tools. Sometimes I like my wire tools a little bit shorter. Especially for my students. I notice if they're too long, they're not making really big platters usually. And if I have like students making platters, I have uh, more stuff that I can make another one, or I have a couple of the metal like wire ones that we pay for. But usually I want to make it at least as wide as the bag of clay, and most of my students are making stuff less than 10 inches in width. So some of mine are in about maybe 10 to 12 inches. I'm not measuring it, I'm just eyeballing it. 10 to 12 inches, that's a good spot. I use my finger. I've got my other uh, handle. Now I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to run this line parallel, but right where that mark was, where my finger is, that's where I'm going to start wrapping it. So double checking, 10 to 12 inches, or 13 or 18, or however big you want to make it. I'm going to wrap it up the same way. Just going to hold the lines parallel. I'm going to just wrap it. And you got to make sure you get that piece going underneath there. And if you don't do it right, fix it. There we go. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie the other end. So I'm going to kind of lay it parallel again, measuring about 10 to 12 inches across. And that's where I'm going to kind of start wrapping. And wrap it up pretty much the same way. Keep it nice and tight. Make sure that little business end of the wire is kind of tucked underneath, and you're wrapping the tail end around the business end. Nice and tight. Now we're just going to tie this up again. You want to try to not make sure this gets loose while you're tying it, but if it does get a little loose because the way we wrapped it, seems to be that a good tug with your pliers tends to true it out and make it nice and tight again. Before you tie it a second time, double check and make sure it's the width you want. Easily fits around a bag of clay. If I'm making mugs, this is a good diameter or a good width for me to cut off mugs and cups and smaller things like that. And 2 or 3 little knots, 1/4 inch for the tail. Now I got a nice little wire tool.
Okay, now I'm going to show you some of the tools being used. I'm going to start off by making a bowl on the potter's wheel. And this is pretty straightforward. I'm just centering and coning. I have it sped up at 4 times speed. Because this isn't really a throwing video, it's more about demonstrating some of the tools being used. So I'm centering, I'm compressing. I got an old dirty sponge. I'm using a cut up yellow sponge that just got too nasty. Now I have one of my ribs. So this is one of the credit card ribs I made. I sanded it down. I'm going to use that on the inside of the bowl to kind of give it a nice profile, a nice round shape, so my spoon doesn't get caught in the corner, so my Cheerios don't get caught. Now I'm using a needle tool. And pretty straightforward, making a bowl. Oftentimes I use a pencil. Here I'm using a wooden dowel that's kind of sharpened to a point, and using my wire tool to cut it off. My bat's doing weird things, don't know what's going on. It's changing color bat, they're extra. Anyways, now I'm going to make a cup. I usually use about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds, maybe 3/4 pound to 1.5 pounds, depending on how big of a cup or a mug I'm making. This is a little under 1 pound. Probably it'll be a 8 to 10 ounce cup when it's done. Bringing the walls up, keeping the lip compressed. Starting all the way at the bottom. And getting a basic shape of the cup that I'm looking for. A cylinder. And now I'm going to use my Starbucks rib to clean up that shape and profile a little bit. And then always go back and compress the lip and keep that shape round. And just giving it a little more shape, a little more volume at the bottom, an extra sip or two. A little wobble, it's okay. Keep that lip compressed. Pretty straightforward stuff when it comes to making a mug, using my wire tool made with the fishing line. And now I'm going to make a handle. I like to make my handles and let them set up before I attach them. So I usually make the handles before I trim. I use the combination of a pinching and a pulling technique. Lots of pinching, lots of squeezing. Once I get a kind of a bone or a bow tie shape, I introduce a little water, kind of pulling it using my thumb to kind of add a little groove on either side. I'm constantly flipping it over and working on both sides. I apologize for being a little out of frame right here, but that's what we get. My bat is doing the magical color changing bat thing, so ask your local retailer how to get those. And now I'm going to start using the trimming tools. The trimming tool I'm using here is one I made that is made the process I showed you, but not the exact one. The exact one is drying right now. It's still kind of wet. But this one's been sharpened on a bench grinder, and this one has been used for probably, at least I've had this one for a year. And it's been one of my daily grinders for a while. It has a flat side and a round side. So a square side and like a circular side. Trim the bowl, trim a nice foot, and I usually try to kind of rethrow the foot a little, compress it. I just use water to trim, to attach to the wheel most of the time. I'll use clay or my Giffen grip at times, but I find water works fine for most of the stuff I do. So here I'm trimming the mug, pretty straightforward. Make a nice flat bottom, using the corner of the tool. And right about here, my camera fell into my bucket, so it got a little cloudy. Apologize. Now I'm going to attach the handle. The handle has been sitting out for a little while. It's firmed up to a nice leather hard. I usually make my handles a little fatter on the ends, and I cut it down. Use that rib to cut it down, my Starbucks rib. And I use a little piece of like a wooden rolling pin to kind of round it off and try to make it a little easier and better attachment to the thing. So tracing the kind of shape of the handle, wetting and scratching. I don't really use like specified slip. I just use the water out of my bucket, kind of dig down to the bottom. I just tend to water scratch, slip and score, whatever you want to call it. I'm a water scratch vocabulary person. Very literal, water and scratch. Anyways, here I'm attaching it. I put a lot of pressure on the inside and then pressure on the outside, kind of squeezing along those profile and those finger marks I made to try to compress the clay, get it in there as tight as I can. Once I feel like it's a good attachment, I start to kind of reshape it and add a little water, round it out. This is like a one finger handle. It's pretty straightforward. Most people that are making handles. Here's where I'm using the tool made out of the comb. So that tool is really great for kind of sealing off that attachment. And then one of my favorite tools is also a makeup sponge. Just the regular little triangle makeup sponges. The dollar store they have them, or Target. Go an aisle over from the women's hair products. So yeah, that's a mug and a bowl. Cool. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that little workshop I put together. I showed you guys how to make some tools, some trimming tools, some needle tools, a wire tool, a scratcher tool. I made I made a mug, I made a bowl. Hopefully that tool making process was pretty straightforward. The materials are very easily accessible. I'm sure a lot of you guys have them at home already, so there's no need to go shopping. But if you do got to go shopping, 99-cent store or the dollar store or Target or Walmart or wherever you get stuff like I just showed you. Some of the other things that if you're out shopping or if you're out looking around that you can also get creative with are bamboo chopsticks is another material I use a lot. These are very easily carved with an X-Acto knife to make into shapes. You can sharpen them in a pencil sharpener, kind of. You can do all kinds of things with that. Another one of my favorite things is the makeup sponge. So a couple aisles over from the hair care section, you can find the makeup section, and that's kind of very, very easily accessible. Another one of my favorite finds in the dollar store, specifically the dollar store in California. I'm sure many other dollar stores or 99-cent stores. I found that these fettling knives are amazing. I use these with my student. I use these with my students all the time. There are 4 of them for $1, and they're very efficient, and they're not too sharp that you're gonna easily like cut yourself. But they cut through leather hard and plastic clay beautifully. And the handles, if they come out, it's easy to just epoxy or glue back together. But they usually last quite a while. I don't have to glue them together very often. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that workshop with me. Again, my name is Ryan Reich, and if you have any questions or comments, you can contact me at Ryan Reich Ceramics on Instagram, or you can email me at ryanreichceramics@gmail.com. I also have a podcast. It's called Clay is a 4-letter word. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you find your podcast. I also have an Instagram page for that, at Clay is a 4-letter word. I also have an Etsy shop, ryanreichceramics.etsy.com. And in January 2020, I will be a demonstrator at ClayCon West making a sneaker mug, which is something I've been making lately, and using a lot of my handmade tools. And I'll actually be showing some of this process of making the tools at the workshop, and I will actually be giving away a bunch of tools. So if you make it to ClayCon West, if you come into my workshop, I plan on having a bunch of tools to give away to anybody that kind of hangs out and watches me do my whole hour and a half, 90-minute start to finish workshop, making some stuff and making some tools and having some fun. And I'm really excited and looking forward to it. So all these things will be linked below in the video, so please check those out. And again, my name is Ryan Reich, and thanks for watching.